Well, good afternoon, everybody. The future of affordable housing, the challenge of affordable housing. Affordability and the ability to get on the ladder and to move up the ladder is a huge challenge, as we all know. It's a challenge in many of the major cities, and the leaders and the mayors that I meet are clearly troubled by this issue. What we've done today is to put together a distinguished panel. We're going to hear about how they're dealing with the challenge in New York, how they're dealing with the challenge in Australia, particularly in Sydney, and here in Singapore. And if I may introduce my panelists, first of all, Carl Weisbrod. Carl, if you'd like to join us. He's the former director of the New York City Department of City Planning, and more particularly, he was the chairman of the New York City Planning Commission, very much wearing a housing hat. Then we're delighted to have with us Dr. Liu Tai Kerr. He's the founding chairman of the Center for Liveable Cities, which we've heard about, of course, today. And in particular, he's a ULI trustee. And ladies, not last, but Paige Walker. She's the general manager at residential development at Mirvac in Western Australia. So welcome, panel. Thank you for joining us. Just in order to give some context to the discussion, I just thought, if I may, yes, there we are. Just quickly how we're trying to deal with things in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is a somewhat unique city, but it is the most expensive residential market in the world. So we are particularly challenged, if you like, by the issue of affordability. What we do in Hong Kong, very simply, is to divide those in the queue, if you like, into those who are in crisis and those who are in pain. Those in crisis essentially can't help themselves. Those in pain can help themselves if they're helped by the government. Sorry, just go back one, if I can. Yeah. So for those in crisis, very quickly, we have 800,000 public rental units in Hong Kong. That's 1/3 of the population live in public rental housing. Largely, this is a legacy of the past, the refugees who came across the border, the boundary, into Hong Kong. These are highly subsidized. These people pay about 14-15% of market. But we have huge challenges around immobility. They're all far too comfortable, if you like. Inability to meet demand. Aging portfolio. Imagine having to replace 800,000 units and a 4-year waiting list. And this is just a quick picture of some of the stock that we're building at the moment. Then for those in pain, we provide units for purchase, and these are provided on a discounted, subsidized basis, subsidized by between 30 to 50% of the market value, but sold subject to fairly strict restrictions on resale and netting. But again, we can't keep up with the demand. So we're not a very good case study, a good example, if you like. This is an example of our subsidized sale product. What quickly are we doing? And we're going to hear from the panelists what they're doing. Land supply, obviously, as we've heard, here in Singapore as well, is a challenge, and we have to produce more land and more supply. Bringing the developers into the party, making them provide up to 30% of affordable units within their schemes. This is, we watch New York and we watch London and others. Relaxing HOS restrictions, so those people who bought on a subsidized basis can sell on more easily. And then looking at conversion of industrial buildings into starter homes. We have a new chief executive, and she is very keen on this particular model. But that's just give you some context for the discussion we're about to have. Let's start, if we can, with Carl. Would like to come and talk to us about New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. I did note that many people didn't think 100% of the top 100 cities had an affordable housing crisis. I would certainly say that 100% of successful cities have an affordable housing crisis. And I think we're switching now from an emphasis this morning on technology, basically, to a discussion of equity and what it means to be a city. And let me just start by talking about the challenge in New York and what we're doing about it and how successful or not successful we've been. So first of all, our population is now at an all-time high. It's grown almost 5% in the last 5 years. We're generally not building enough market rate housing or affordable housing or even market rate housing fast enough to meet our demand. You can see the gap between the affordable units that are available to extremely low-income New Yorkers and the number of households that are either very low income or extremely low income New Yorkers. Extremely low income New Yorkers, just to define it, are a family of 4 making less than 25,000 US dollars a year. And to compound this problem, rents are rising in New York much faster than income is rising. New York is a renter city. 2/3 of New York City households are renters, and a majority of all the renters in New York City are now rent burdened, which means that they're paying more than 30% of their total household income on shelter. And a substantial minority of New York City renters are extremely rent burdened, which means they're spending more than 50% of their household income on shelter. Now, to compound the problem in New York, we also have 60,000 New Yorkers every night that are sleeping in homeless shelters. 25,000 of them are children. It's really unacceptable in a civilized society. And I will say, in some mitigation for New York, that New York is probably the only city, it is the only city in the United States that guarantees shelter every night to anyone, even if they've just arrived in the city that day. So there is a guaranteed right to shelter in New York. In addition to this 60,000, there are thousands, an untold number of thousands, who are living in overcrowded housing conditions who also are in need of affordable housing. So what is New York doing about it? And so when Mayor de Blasio ran for office, housing was an issue, but it was not the number one issue. It became the number one issue because after he was elected, there was a survey of New Yorkers, not a random survey, but an actual survey of all New Yorkers in every single neighborhood. Some 70,000 people responded, and surprisingly, affordable housing was the number one need, more important than crime, more important than education, more important than anything, affordable housing in every single community in the city, in rich neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, and middle-class neighborhoods. And so quickly, affordable housing became the city's number one priority in 2014. And so the mayor established a goal of providing 200,000 units of affordable housing, 120,000 preserved units, 80,000 newly affordable units, and 160,000 market rate units over 10 years, from 2014 to 2024. And to just cut to the punchline for the moment, we are ahead of schedule in New York. After 2 years, we have produced some 50,000 units of affordable housing, which is far more than the city has produced, at least since the Depression era. We've accomplished this by using a number of tools. First of all, mandatory inclusionary zoning, which Nick referred to a bit earlier. Any time now in New York City, the city changes its zoning to create more residential capacity, either by increasing density, increasing FAR, or alternatively, changing use restrictions from manufacturing space to permit residential use. The developer there, anyone developing, must provide a certain percentage of affordable housing, 25% affordable to meet lower income needs, 60% of the area median income, which is about $45,000 a year, or 30% affordable at 80% of slightly higher affordability standards. Second, we have changed our zoning requirements dramatically to make it less expensive to build affordable housing, indeed to build all housing, by loosening the requirements, the building envelope, when affordable housing is produced, and by eliminating parking requirements for affordable housing in a development. Parking used to be, still is in many respects, a third rail of community outrage. To reduce parking requirements was a tough sell, but for affordable housing it's been done, which has caused the cost of affordable housing to be reduced. Third, the city has allocated over 10 years $8.2 billion in subsidies for affordable housing. And that is key. That's only to build affordable housing. That's for capital only. Just to give you a sense of proportion, that's 10% of the city's entire capital budget over 10 years. That includes roads and sewers and pollution plants and parks and everything. 10% is now allocated for affordable housing. But the city does not allocate funds for operating, and OpEx is a serious problem because even with capital costs being provided, even with affordable housing costs at zero for the ultimate occupant, unless that occupant earns about 40% of area median income, about $30,000 a year for a family of four, that unit is not sustainable. So we still have a hard time reaching the lowest income populations. Fourth, I should say, we've adopted a very ambitious zoning plan to upzone neighborhoods. We are a built city. We don't have greenfields. We don't have areas in which we can expand. So we can only build more housing or allow more housing by creating greater density. And needless to say, that is a big challenge in a built-up community. So we have approached it through comprehensive planning. We've targeted 15 neighborhoods in the city. 2 have so far been adopted. Several more will be adopted by the end of this year. It has included, in order to accomplish that, a significant investment beyond the $8.2 billion in housing subsidies for public investments in needed area-wide improvements, such as schools, parks, and streetscape. And that is an additional $1 billion that has been allocated just in those neighborhoods for in order to accommodate a growing and denser population. In general, this has been a very successful venture. I will say that this has been targeted exclusively to renting households. And one problem and one challenge New York City really has is how do we reach and how do we engage with home ownership, which we have not figured out a way to do yet for affordable housing. And needless to say, even though this has been an extraordinarily ambitious program, it still does not meet the demand. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much. Paige, would you like to go next? Thank you. Let's hear about Australia and Sydney particularly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction, Nicholas. I'm very pleased to be here and to be speaking with you about affordable housing and emerging solutions to the issue with specific reference to Australia. While there is a lot of commentary, expertise and interest in affordable housing, what is in short supply, apart from the new affordable homes that we need, is a silver bullet solution. In Australia, where unprecedented population growth and housing demand is urging rising house prices, many people on lower incomes are struggling to find affordable housing. Before I start talking about the solutions, we need to define the problem we are tackling. The West Australian Department of Housing defines affordable housing as housing which is appropriate for the needs of a range of very low to moderate income households and priced so that these households are also able to meet other basic living costs. As a rule of thumb, housing is usually considered affordable if it costs less than 30% of the gross Australian household income. So, when mortgage costs or rent consume too much of a household's income, or when price growth outstrips wage growth, making entry into the market extremely challenging, then we have a problem with affordability. And if this continues, we'll end up with cities that don't have a diverse mix of people at all points of the income spectrum, which we need to make sure we have dynamic, vibrant, livable, productive and sustainable communities. So, what can be done to address this issue? Let's start with the single most powerful lever we have, supply. Sydney is now the second most expensive housing market in the world. The median house price is now 1.12 million Australian dollars, and the median mortgage is 12 times the median gross household income. The number of households formed each year is expected to grow to 172,000 homes from 2016 to 2017. However, only an annual average of 153,000 homes per annum were completed nationally over the past decade. Dwelling completions at an all-time 40-year high, but remain well short of the 36,000 new homes needed each year to achieve the Greater Sydney Commission's target of 725,000 new homes by 2036. The fundamental driver of increasing house prices, particularly in Sydney, is the undersupply of housing and not keeping pace with population growth, and the tax burden imposed on new supply. Further, Sydney has one of the slowest and most complex planning systems in the country, and one estimates that approvals take 3 times as long in Sydney as they do in Brisbane. Some measures that could bring supply of owner-occupier and rental stock to the market faster in Australia and more cheaply are planning reforms and looking at radical ways to tackle taxes and levies, faster release of land, faster approval of rezoning, and incentives to developers to fast-track supply of affordable housing. Other ways are applying state learnings nationally and government support for insurance and financing. There are several Australian states-based funding and finance initiatives that have been introduced to help make purchasing a home more affordable and should be considered nationally, such as reducing the cost of purchasing a home through the abolishment of stamp duty taxes for first home buyers on homes up to 600,000 Australian dollars. This was successfully introduced in Victoria, and just to give you a bit of context, up to 50% of the cost to the customer of a simple block of land can be attributed to taxes, charges and regulatory costs. 50%. And stamp duty is a part of this. Stamp duty is a substantial hurdle to home buyers and dampens transaction activity, and also is locking people into housing choices. Another government initiative is Key Start. In Western Australia, the government has introduced their Key Start initiative that assists people into affordable housing by providing loan products that help eligible people who cannot access traditional finance to buy their own homes. They do this through low deposit loans and shared equity schemes. The government also proposed a national rental affordability scheme which assists lower income families, particularly key workers in areas close to their employment. The private sector can also innovate and provide unique solutions to affordable housing when the conditions are right. There are 2 key obstacles faced by first home buyers in Sydney, and they are 1, the requirement for a high deposit, and 2, competition from other buyers. Mirvac successfully introduced the Right Start initiative, through which we recently reserved 60 apartments priced below 750,000 Australian dollars for first home buyers. These home buyers could also exchange on a 5% deposit, and in Australia it's typically a 10% deposit, and they could enter into an agreement to pay the remaining 5% in 2 annual instalments. The Right Start addressed both of the obstacles that first home buyers face when purchasing their new home. Build to rent is another solution that can unlock supply and in that way help to address affordability. There is an Australian national shortage of affordable rental housing for low-income households of 500,000 dwellings, and over 80% of renters have no fixed-term lease or are on a lease of 12 months or less. And half of all renters have moved over 3 times, and 10% have moved over 11 times. Renting in Australia is often seen as the last choice and something only to be done in the short term if possible, but we can change that. The creation of an institutional built-to-rent sector to deliver large-scale, affordable, well-managed rental stock to the market would provide another viable, secure housing choice. The built-to-rent market, including affordable rentals, could be part of a transformational shift in the provision of diverse, accessible and secure choices of both owned and rented homes. This is a great opportunity for developers and governments to work together to create what has been done very successfully in the US and the UK. Whilst all the initiatives spoken about so far are ways we can address affordable housing, we also need to look at making the new homes affordable to live in and for the longer term. We can achieve this through reduced living costs, multi-generational housing and location and proximity to amenity. Mirvac have recently launched a house with no bills. It was designed to reduce or eliminate the cost of utilities through renewable energy and smart technology. Mirvac will invite a family of 4 to live, rent and bill free for 12 months to collect data and understand how people live and monitor their utility consumption. We'll then use these learnings and implement them more broadly into all of our communities so that more people can benefit from the sustainable initiatives and reduce cost of living. So in summary, affordable housing is a complex issue, and to meet the challenges globally, it's going to require continued leadership and constructive engagement, which only can be done through smart partnerships with government, the private sector and the not-for-profit organisations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Liu, would you like to make your comments? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm here today as the chairman of Center for Liveable City, but I was involved in public housing for 20 years, so I tweaked the content a little bit and talk about what Singapore has done in public housing. Just to give you a quick impression, in 1965 we became a country. So the population grew tremendously. The land also grows. Since we're a young country, everything grows. Population, the GDP per capita goes, and also the household income ceiling for eligibility of affordable housing also went up from $800 to $12,000 today, to make sure that people who can't afford private housing would always have a home to go to. So public housing in Singapore, first of all, the government's policy from the very beginning was home ownership for all. We wanted people to be able to own homes. And affordability, those of you who understand the Singapore market, you see our selling price in one of the new towns, Toa Payoh, it's in the 100,000s, and it's really, in private housing, it will be 2 or 3 times more than what people have to pay for the same floor area. And eligibility, $12,000 household income per month. And at the moment, we have built, well, including up to today, about 1 million dwelling units. And 82% of the people in Singapore live in public housing. Home ownership, it's over 90%. That means citizens as well as permanent residents, including those in private housing. Because the government's goal is to make everybody become a stakeholder of this tiny place so that, we have a great sense of ownership and belonging to this small place. Now, in 1960, when we first started with 1.6 million people, 3 out of 4 persons lived in squatters. By 1985, because of a strong push by the government, we achieved these 4 statements: no homeless, no squatters, no ghettos, and also no ethnic enclaves in 25 years. And this was 1960. 3 out of 4 persons lived in this condition. And this is today, people live in public housing. And the key concept of public housing would be we actually subdivide the city into regions, then to 25 new towns, and also neighborhoods and precincts. So public housing plan is integrated with urban plan. If you look at that small square, inside there, we have a very detailed lab plan. This is the town, and this is the neighborhood. And below that, you take one area, it's a precinct. So there's a cascading of hierarchy of communities. And in order to ensure quality control, to make sure each new town is highly self-sufficient, this is the prototype for every new town. In every new town, we must have all these facilities. And how much facilities are we talking about? Typically, in a new town of 250 to 200,000 people, about 45% of the land is used for housing, and the rest would be for facilities. So we do mean business to make the new town highly self-sufficient. And how do we make this thing happen, I would say political commitment is very important. I think clarity equals courage is the most important thing. Once you think through the issue, you have the courage to do against the world trend. For example, in the 60s, when Singapore was extremely backwards, and yet after thinking through, we decided that the only way to solve housing problem is to go high-rise, high-density, which was condemned around the world at that time. But we tried to find out why high-rise, high-density was condemned by the rest of the world, identify the causes, and proceeded to eliminate it. And we have very clear and fair criteria to rent, to set the selling price, and also the government, through good track record, can actually acquire land, exercise our Land Acquisition Act to get land with people's support. And we have clear resettlement policies to clear the squatters, and also very creative financial system. Let me just show you the financial system. Okay, maybe before that. Besides the government, I like to say that, give myself a pat on the shoulder, including my colleagues, that we have competent colleagues. We actually created prototyping, as you saw earlier, and even standardizing of everything to ensure quality control. We get good feedback through property management and continuously improve our planning, design, details, as well as policies, rules, and regulations. And this is a creative financial system. It will take me half an hour to explain this. So just to give an idea, we create a kind of virtuous circle so that while we can provide subsidized housing, but the government also have income through other sources so that we can survive the subsidized housing in Singapore for the last 50-odd years. Okay, then just to show that we did have a creative financial system. And the key message I would like to convey is that the affordable housing experience, the key thing is that strong commitment and clear goals by the government. And that leads to good track records. And then that leads to trust from the people and effective rules. Because people have been telling me the Singapore government is an autocratic government. I think it does appear to be autocratic, but we have to the government has to subject to totally secret ballot every 5 years. So how would the government be able to be re-elected and yet appear to be strong-handed? Because the government deliver good track record, earn the trust of the people, and therefore keep creating effective measures to make things happen, plus competent professionals. And therefore, I would like to say, because of that, we have been able to have a strong delivery. Okay, this is 1967. It's a painting by my father of the National Day in 1967. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Thank you. Well, as we've heard several times today, Singapore very much the role model. Yes, I think so. Exemplar in terms of how you deliver and achieve the objectives. We've heard, I think it's fair to say, a number of tailored solutions, city-specific solutions to the challenge. I mean, supply is still obviously an issue in Hong Kong, an issue in New York, issue again in Sydney, but different responses. Could I just ask a couple of questions and then we'll move to audience? And Greg, I suspect you have some questions as well on your pad. First of all, impact of leadership, because it seems to me when you look at the cities that are really getting their heads around this, if you like, it's largely a function of the leadership, particularly a strong mayor, and I know in New York this has been very much the case.
Yes, I would say it requires a strong mayor. New York has always had it has a strong mayor system, and certainly a mayor who is very focused and committed to the goal of affordable housing, and prepared to put his money where his mouth is. This is largely driven by money. There are two other issues, though, that I think require strong leadership because they require, at least in a dense city, a very tough decision-making. One is dealing with communities that, for the most part, don't want change. And so how to integrate more density, particularly affordable housing, and particularly diverse economic households, which are, for New York is very important, into existing communities requires very strong leadership. And then the third issue that requires strong leadership is we talk about affordable housing, but affordable housing for whom? Is it affordable housing for the very poor? Is it affordable housing to meet workforce demands? Because now in major cities, even middle-class families are being priced out, and workers are being priced out. How those decisions are made and how they're implemented is a very important leadership function.
Paige, leadership in Sydney?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's essential to have strong leadership, and I mean, especially in Sydney at the moment, they categorise the affordable housing as hitting crisis point. So both the Prime Minister and the Premier are committed to making change and making it more affordable for residents in Australia, which I think you need to make things change, particularly the planning system, so that supply can happen quicker. And one of the other big things which I spoke about before is the build to rent is, in Australia, it's the Australian dream to own your own home. So it is really a home ownership market rather than a rental market. So it's how can we change, and rental market is really seen as an inferior housing choice. So how can we change that belief in the Australian market so that we can increase more supply and provide affordable housing through the rental side.
And Dr. Liu, you clearly have the leadership here in Singapore.
Well, I think I already mentioned that actually political leaders opened the doors for the technocrats to walk through. If the political leader did not introduce a clear policy, introduce the legislations, or set up well-designed government agencies, there's nothing we could do because there'll be lots of roadblocks. But in our case, fortunately, whenever there was a need, the political leader would then design something, either law or agencies or strategies, and finance, of course, important. For example, in my 20 years in HDB, every year I had to submit a budget to the government. Not once budget was cut by 1 cent. Every year I went through it. But competent authority, technocrats is important. I think, the fact that we plan, design, supervise construction, but most importantly, manage the properties and receive lots of complaints. Now, instead of throwing the complaints, we study the complaints, analyze them. The faults that we committed, we eliminate them. The good suggestion, we reintroduce them to the next project. So a lot of friends ask me, which was my favorite new towns. I said the latest one, obviously.
Thank you. Greg, I sense you got some questions on your pad.
I think we've got a lot of questions here, and some of them are quite spiky. So,
Okay, good.
If you want to hear those. So,
I like spiky.
One of them is foreign buyers are often blamed for this problem of affordability. Is that actually the case in these cities? Or how can we ensure that residents of affordable housing graduate into the main market? And what are we doing to help them become better off? There's a question very direct to Dr. Liu saying, isn't Singapore's 99-year leasehold structure going against sustainable home ownership and wealth preservation for families? How do you see that policy changing?
Can we take those three?
Yep.
Sydney, I know foreign investment in residential is an emotive topic, so perhaps you could answer that.
It is. I mean, all the states, specifically Sydney, I think just recently they've increased it further again to a further, it's now 8% in terms of a FIRB tax to buy into Sydney. I think the state do believe that is one of the key reasons why there's such an increase in pricing and the short supply as well. It's a catch-22 because they are also driving the development within each of the states. But Yeah, it is definitely something. It's pricing other people that live locally out of the market, because it is just, there is so much demand, particularly in Sydney, for apartments and housing generally, that it's making it hard for first home buyers to be able to afford to purchase and also compete, because there's so many other buyers out there as well. So, I mean, with the tax, it has slowed it down slightly, but I still believe with where the taxes are in, you know, still Singapore and Hong Kong, there's still the drive to invest in Sydney and Melbourne.
Just a comment from Hong Kong. Foreign investment tends to be focused at the top end of the market, and therefore the people we're talking about today who are trying to get on the ladder are not directly affected, although obviously if the price is right at the top end, it sucks up the whole market.
Right.
As a knock-on effect.
And I would also say in New York, it's really a bifurcated market. There's a top end, and while foreign buyers are often seen as as a cause, in fact, in many respects, they're a solution, because they cross-subsidize the affordable housing on the one hand, and second, in a city like New York, which relies so heavily on its real estate tax to finance all of this, they are paying top real estate taxes for services that they're not getting because they're not there all the time. And so it's really a bifurcated market.
Dr. Liu, 99-year leases?
Mine?
Sorry, there was a question about
Yes.
the impact of 99-year leases.
Well, Singapore is such a tiny place. The government fear that if we did not impose a lease system, when we run out of land and we want to redevelop that country, we don't have the land. Because in other cities, if you make a mistake, you just take over some agricultural land, but we don't have that kind of luxury. So, in fact, the lease system in everything, not just housing, but in industry particularly, has paid off very handsomely, because, for example, in industry, our lease period is like 15 years or 30 years, or 15 plus 15, and many of the leases have expired. And in the early days, because of the kind of backwardness of the industry and the low renter that we must stick to, so we built pretty basic factory workshops. And nowadays, once the lease terminated, we will acquire them back, take them back, and rebuild to higher intensity. And therefore, you can have more industrial development with less land. And we haven't really, when it comes to housing, we haven't come to that yet, because it's 99 years. But in the event that we do make a serious mistake, in terms of shortage of land,
I think
an option.
Sorry, yes, I think leasehold also is common across Asia. It's not just a Singapore phenomenon. We have 50-year leases in Hong Kong.
Maybe I'll just add that in Asia, this is a special problem, because we have 60% of the world population on 30% of the world land. So,
Greg, do you have some more? And then if the audience have any questions?
There was also the question about the residents in affordable housing and how you help them to move up the housing ladder. But there's two other contrasting ones here, Nick. So one person says, integrating affordable housing into development is understood as an important part of ensuring diversity in growing cities. But what can be done to help developers see past the immediate bottom line when they're mandated to provide affordable housing and they complain about it, brackets, versus another point here that says in Hong Kong and New York, where they're in, are there incentives for developers to provide the 30% or the 40% they're required to do? Otherwise, isn't this policy just driving up the cost of producing housing and therefore making the problem you're trying to solve worse?
So I will,
Please, yeah.
in New York, in very strong markets, there are no subsidies and no incentives, except that we are increasing density. So we're creating new value, new land value, really, for developers in return for their obligation, really, to provide a percentage of affordable housing. In less than strong areas, the city does provide subsidy for a period of time, but also in those areas, the percent of affordability is required permanently forever. And so as the subsidy wears off, the permanent affordability remains, which is a means of preventing serious displacement and gentrification over time.
I mean, just to answer the question from a Hong Kong perspective, and I think I can bring the two questions together. In Hong Kong, the idea is that, yes, the developer provides the 30%, but it'll be reflected in the price he pays for the site. And just to keep him under control, if you like, he'll only be allowed to sell these units up to a certain level of price. And this links into the first question. These units are targeted at people who are on the ladder but want to move up. So this is a response to people who are in HOS or some form of subsidised purchase and want to move into the private sector.
Nick, there's just two questions for Paige as well, if I can tell you
Please.
what they are. So several people are asking Paige, which of the initiatives in Singapore, New York and Hong Kong do you think are most transferable to the Australian market? And then they also want to know, what advice could you give to other developers who aren't yet sure of how to start making moves into alternative approaches in Australia? What would be the advice for others to come into the market?
Okay, so the first one was,
Which of the
Oh,
tools from the
initiatives?
other cities are you...
I think particularly being in Singapore and walking around and just seeing the built form outcome, I think quite envious of Singapore's commitment to get things done and the fast planning approval process. In Sydney, I think that is obviously one of the biggest things that are impacting us to actually deliver more supply to the market. And you come here and see what the beautiful buildings and the end outcome and their commitment to actually delivering it is quite impressive. So I definitely think in terms of, there is the benefit of having a clear goal and the commitment and the leadership to make sure that things actually happen. And then in terms of the developer side, I think there's some good examples of seeing how affordable housing can be integrated into developments, right? I think the one thing that we've learned is that there's no blanket approach for any development, and that's the one thing that we find difficult when talking to councils and government, because you can't have this one-dimensional blanket approach because it doesn't work. Every market's different, every sub-market's different, and we often have discussions with, for example, there's a project in WA we're working on with an exclusive waterfront development, and they wanted us to provide 10% affordable housing in there, and the average price was $1 million, and then the strata fees or the owner's corporate fees were sitting at $12,000 a year. And like, how is that affordable? We can give you your 10% affordable homes, but who is going to pay for these ongoing costs, as opposed to that is the great opportunity for the developer to give a cash in lieu and the money be put to a better building that's more service with no car parking, probably less premium amenities, and is more affordable to live in. So I think there is some definitely good examples throughout Australia that people can see of how it does work.
Do I have questions from the audience? Please, on my right. Difficult to see with the light in your eyes, but I can see you. Can we get a microphone, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the sharing. I couldn't afford a house accommodation in New York. So I'm a resident of New York 7 days a year, fractional ownership. I just came back from Dublin, Ireland. The Guinness Brewery, their land lease and water rights lease for the Dublin River, 1,000 years. They only consume 300 years so far. Would any of the cities consider 1,000 years? And I agree with you, leadership. Singapore, Dubai, the 3 mayors of New York are visionary leaders, exemplars, not the exempted. They walk to work. So 1,000 years and leasehold, would you consider it? And fractional ownership of residents?
No, and the answer is probably not. For New York City, unlike most Asian cities, doesn't own its land for the most part. It's privately owned, and so the land is owned in fee. Leases tend to be relatively short-term leases, but the affordable housing is affordable permanently and forever, and the person who lives in that unit of affordable housing can stay there as long as the family wants. Their rent may go up as their income goes up, and in that sense, they're on a ladder. But they're there permanently forever.
I'm sorry, I see a red light. I'm going to have to draw a line. I expect there are more questions, but obviously chance to talk in the wings later. Just one thing I wanted to mention on affordability also is one of the unfortunate impacts, and we're seeing this across the region, is of course smaller and smaller units in order to make them affordable. Average size of unit in Hong Kong is now 41 square meters, and we're building units of 20 square meters in order to respond to affordability challenges, which is very unfortunate, very unfortunate. But panel, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.